everybody, it's Mike with On Point Preparedness. Got another live stream for you guys today. Unfortunately, I'm not going to do a ministry-based teaching because I lost all my notes. So the company that I get my Microsoft 365 package for and I use OneNote, for whatever reason, they decided to turn it off. It's no longer part of the package. So mostly all my notes that I had synced online were gone, and so now I've got to rebuild some of those teachings for you. So hopefully sometime this week or so I'll be able to have maybe a video or two on the Bible and get again to the ministry-oriented teaching aspect of this channel. But for today, we're going to talk a little bit more about the virus. And I said I probably wasn't going to be talking about that from here on out, but here I am, and that's why you don't make vows to the Lord, because you never know how it's going to go. But there is a lot of important news that I wanted to share with you all. It's been about a week since I touched base with you, so I wanted to share a couple videos with you, some articles, as well as some prepping tips. Again, just a little bit every video that I do, just sharing some of my thoughts. A lot of people found the prior videos helpful, so hopefully you'll find this one helpful as well. So first, to the news. We'll just switch over to my screen sharing here, if I can bring this up. Most of you who are following the news as of lately have probably seen that the stock market has crashed a little bit. Not on a full-on crash, but it dropped at most at about 1,000 points, all because of this coronavirus scare. And that's mostly driven from the fact that you have a surge of cases in Italy, South Korea, and Iran. There's some other countries as well, but those were the ones that made the news. Particularly, there's a couple towns and cities in North Italy where they have pretty much put 50,000 people, I believe, 50,000 people under lockdown. What's really interesting about this is, I'll pull up this video here. It's just the panic that is sort of set in. You have typical panic buying here. I'll just play this really quick clip for you all.
More than 3 hours drive from the center of Italy's coronavirus outbreak, but panic buying has set in.
Ma perché ci sono gli scaffali della pasta vuoti? Ma che cosa sta succedendo? Manco quando è scoppiata la seconda guerra mondiale c'era stato un panico così.
Perhaps this is human nature. When fear sets in, reach for comfort food.
So this panic buying is actually, happening in Italy and also South Korea, because the cases there in South Korea, they've spread to pretty much every single province of South Korea. In fact, I think I have an article here. No, I want to share those ones a little bit later. Here we go. This was a really interesting article that I saw on Drudge from the Daily Mail. Check out this line right here. This is the city of Daegu, and it is where people are lining up just to get masks because they just can't get the mask. And again, it's the panic buying. I think they have this drone footage here where these lines are just absolutely immense. And so we've been talking about, prepping in faith, not doing anything extreme, but just having, the essential supplies. And really, it's not an if. I mean, I really do think when this shows up in the United States, you've got a lot of experts in the field of biological warfare and pandemics saying that this is more than likely going to be a global pandemic. Fear-mongering. Sorry about that. It's really not fear-mongering or anything like that. It's a very practical consideration with the rate of spread that we're seeing. And so we really should just be mindful and get the essentials prepped and ready. Some of the things that I've talked about in the prior videos. Now, those videos, I started on them about 2 weeks ago, and I started talking about, getting your essentials, food, water, all those basic supplies. You can go back to those prior videos. I'm not going to rehash all that. But I just did want to take note of this as well. So we're seeing the panic buying in northern Italy. We're seeing the panic buying in South Korea. But it's actually happening here in the States, even though we don't have a reported blow up of cases. I want to show you a couple things here. So this was a picture that I shared on my On Point Preparedness Facebook account. Again, if I've mentioned this in the last couple videos. If you're not following that page, I do post more frequently on there than I do YouTube videos, so you might get some nuggets of information. But this is from one of our local Home Depot stores, and although the tags might be a little bit difficult to read, every single one of these is some type of respirator or mask, and they were completely barren. I can tell you that on Friday I went to a couple Home Depot, or no, sorry, rather, I went to a couple Lowe's, and they were fairly stocked on Friday. Come Sunday, not so much. Probably about 75% of everything was bought over. And I had a conversation with the cashier, and I brought up the 2 masks, and she's like, "Oh, I see you found it," almost implying that a lot of people are going to these stores looking for these masks. So I do think that a lot of these stores still have stock. Again, when I went today, they had N95 masks in about 3 different sizes, maybe about 5 of each left. I know there's other stores like Harbor Freight or Menards. Again, if you check out your local Home Depot or Lowe's, they probably still have a couple of these. I think it's a good thing to have some, just because when we do start to see cases like this in the United States, you're going to see the same type of response, if not worse. I mean, we see what happens during Black Friday over non-essentials like TVs, let alone essential things like this. It's just a matter of time before we sort of see that happen again. So while things aren't really panicky, I do think you should just check out your local hardware store. Ace Hardware Store, I think, have them as well. And I've gone to the whole differences between them. You really do want to have like an N95 mask or greater. There's some other categories like an N100 mask, which has much better filtration than the N95. It actually filters 99.9% of particles greater than 0.3 micron or greater, whereas the N95 is 95%. But either or, I think is good. There's also some other categories of filters like the P100. It essentially has the same mechanical filtration or the same efficacy for mechanical filtration, but it has some additional chemical layers for vapors and things like that, which really aren't necessary for our purpose, but just to let you know, the P100 is just as good. Let's see here. This was also a local news article here. So this is WCPO Cincinnati, and so they are recognizing that there's a lot of pharmacies and hardware stores running out of masks, and they're telling people not to panic buy. I'm also telling you not to panic buy. Don't go out there and start, hoarding these things. Buy what you need. It's actually going to be the topic later on towards the end of this video. I want to talk about how this all sort of plays into our faith and how we should be acting as Christians. Something we really need to keep in the back of our minds. But I just want to show you, whether it's South Korea or Italy overseas, it's still happening within the United States. Again, this panic buying. And so you don't want to find yourself in that situation waiting in line without a mask amongst a whole bunch of people that you don't know the state of their health. It's just not a good place to be. And that's why I've been really harping on the fact that we should get the essentials now if you don't already have them. I also recommended just for awareness, right? How much do you need? The current people in Wuhan have been under quarantine for a solid month now. And schools, last time I heard, were going to be closed until May. So, I mean, you think about that, you should have a couple months of supply in terms of water and food and all the other essentials, any particular medicines that you need, things like that. I wanted to bring attention to some of the numbers as well. So a lot of us know, the common person knows, when I hear conversations in the hallway at my own work, people that really aren't into conspiracies or really aren't into the truth movement or anything like that, pretty much everyone knows the vast majority of governments are lying about the numbers. We don't know exactly what the real numbers are, but everyone has a pretty good indication that they're fake. And we see this sort of country after country. Remember, I told you to check out that YouTube channel, Coriana Jones. I really like that name. It's sort of a spin-off of Indiana Jones, except he's Korean. Coriana Jones. Kudos to you for that name. But I found him to be a very excellent researcher. Very balanced. Very, very balanced. Very analytical mind, testing everything, telling you to test for yourself and not just take everything at face value from what he says. Again, check out that channel because he is just a wealth of information. But some of his contacts are actually in Iran. And so Iran is saying, or at least people on the ground level in Iran are saying the same thing, that the government is lying about the cases. There's a lot more than what they're reporting. In fact, we've seen some behaviors in Iran that were also happening in China, where when the virus first hit, China had instructed some, I won't say areas, it might have been some areas, some cities, some towns, but it also might have been particular professions. They told them not to wear protective equipment just because of how that would look. You don't want to cause a panic. We're hearing this. Again, this is citizen journaling, so we need to test it thoroughly, make sure we're hearing it multiple times or at least having some proof. But we're hearing the same sort of thing come out of Iran, where there are people that are in certain professions that are being told that you're not to wear any PPE at the moment because we don't want to stoke public panic. It's actually sort of funny because, coronavirus is a topic at my work. I'm talking with a lot of people about it. Some of the people I'm more close with, I was just like, well, I've got a mask in my bag. And they're like, me too. And so it's pretty hysterical that I think a lot of people probably have masks in their purses and their bags, and no one wants to be that guy, that the first one, to cause panic or to look weird or whatever. But there's more of a cynical nature with regards to being directed that way by the government, just so you don't stoke panic, even though there's an active infection in the area. So we know that these numbers are really being lied about, but I really wanted to call attention to this. So, flu globally, there's a lot of numbers about flu deaths within the United States by the CDC, but this study said that flu estimate deaths were about 250,000 to 500,000 per year, and that was revised upwards of 291,000 to 646,000 every year. That's a lot of deaths from flu. Okay. Let's compare this to the current coronavirus cases. This is the official number, right? Current cases, deaths, and recovered. So 80,000 coronavirus cases and about 2,700 deaths. Okay, 2,700 deaths versus seasonal flu, 300,000 to 650,000. But yet we're seeing this disparate response to this virus, where Russia has shut down its entire border with China. China pretty much put the entire country under quarantine. China has suspended all schooling until May. You have the same type of actions being in South Korea, especially in the city of Daegu, where they've shut down all schooling. I'm not sure for how long, but they've shut down all schooling. You find it in Italy. They've quarantined 50,000 people. They've shut down schools and things like that. I don't know for how long they're going to be shut down. You have a whole bunch of countries limiting or banning travel into and out of China or the surrounding countries. You just have this overwhelming response to this virus. And then we're supposed to believe these numbers compared to seasonal flu, which is orders logarithmic, exponential magnitudes more than the official number. It's a shame. It really is a shame. Actually, this morning at 6 o'clock, I think it was 6 o'clock a.m. Eastern time, there was a conference by the World Health Organization in China with some Chinese officials, and they were just really tampering down the fear, saying China's doing such a great job. There was actually one reporter, Zero Hedge reported on this. There was one reporter who actually had the courage to say, what about the cover-up? How would these numbers be reflected, or how would the response have been better if China had not initially covered up the numbers? And the WHO said, what cover-up? And in their typical nerdy fashion, they said that is not a factor that we considered in our research. So it's just, it's really gross. It is just gross how much they are downplaying the numbers here. Again, it is disparate with the actions of international governments, as well as just the multitude of citizen journaling videos that we're getting. Now, particularly, right, some of these healthcare workers, Coriana Jones' YouTube channel, check out those videos if you haven't seen them. There's healthcare workers. There's a lot of healthcare workers in China that have come down with the virus. And I mean, it's amazing what they're doing, actually being on the front lines and going into work and subjecting themselves to these environments. But a lot of them, when they develop the cough, you can see in these videos that they panic, and there is just a sense of utmost grief, and some of them break down, just completely break down. And a lot of that is caused because, they are working 3 shifts, 2.5, 3 shifts a day. They're really not getting meals. They're really not getting fed. There's a lot of bad things going on over there. But you get this sense of grief from them when they come down with these symptoms, that they know it's an incredibly dangerous disease. Same thing with that whistleblower doctor in China. When he first saw how this was playing out in some of the earlier patients, he blew the whistle, and he succumbed to his disease as well. But again, there's a fear over this disease, and when these hospital workers who are around it so much confirm the fact that they've got it themselves, there was just an utmost grief. And again, that does not align with the numbers either, saying that we're seeing 80% recover with absolutely no symptoms, very mild symptoms at all, and this is only affecting the elderly mostly. I mean, the citizen journaling just doesn't add up to that at all. So again, we need to be prepped, and we need to go about it in a faith-based manner, which was how I wanted to end this video, because that's something we really need to keep in mind. And you know what? I did forget about one thing that I wanted to talk about before we get into, actually 2 things. I'm getting way ahead of myself. 2 things that I want to talk about before we start getting into the faith aspect of this, and something that I really want you to be cognizant of. First one is, I wanted to talk about 5G. So actually, let me just switch on over here, because you guys don't need to see that. 5G. So there's been a lot of conspiracies coming out about this coronavirus, two that I'm aware of, at least to date. There are some people thinking that this virus is only targeted towards Chinese people for some type of extermination of the Asian populace. I'll tell you what, if they can design a disease that well, I mean, that is just sort of an outrageous claim. And what we're seeing, in fact, is right. It's now spreading to European countries. It's more than likely going to spread, globally. And so, really didn't buy that conspiracy theory that this was a designed virus to take out only the Asian population. That theory was brewed simply because people were questioning, why are the numbers of death so limited to Asian countries, and we're really not seeing that same thing in the States and other European countries and Latin America, things like that. I think we will start to see those ramp up. It's just a matter of time with the incubation period of the virus and so on and so forth. The other theory is the whole 5G thing. So I think there might be various levels of theories with regards to how 5G plays with this. I think some people might think that 5G weakened the immune system and then they released a virus. I'm not saying that's not possible. Could be possible. But I've seen a more extreme version where some folks are saying that there is no virus and that this is purely 5G networks. And that is just, I don't think that's true. That's a bit much. And I think we'll see that one disproved as we see this proliferate across the globe, especially, I think, when it starts to hit some countries harder that are impoverished. I think like when you start to see maybe cases in India and Africa potentially, as well as when you start to see it proliferate in first world countries where 5G hasn't been implemented. You know, it is a real virus. And the reason I say that is this 5G theory is that it is interacting with oxygen molecules, and that's what's uh, suffocating people. Essentially, they can't get oxygen because of the 5G waves, and it's also potentially doing something to the body. I just can't get on that ship because this thing is so proliferative. Yeah, there's a lot of hiding of information. Of course, we just opened up this video with that. There's a lot of false information. But with how many infected patients are going around and how many doctors and scientists are involved, um, you just really can't contain something like that. I mean, there definitively is a virus. One of the things that I point to is that the CDC, I looked these up. I didn't have it for you on the screen, but you can look this up yourself. The CDC released the test method for how to diagnose the coronavirus. In fact, so what they use is you can use a CT chest scan, and they basically look for pneumonia or fluid in the lungs. But there's also a test called reverse transcriptase real-time polymerase chain reaction, PCR. It's a genomic test. And so the CDC actually released the unique probe IDs for this virus, and they released the entire test method to detect this virus. And so things like that make it hard to believe that this is only 5G. There is definitively a virus at play here. I'm not saying that 5G is a completely debunked thing and it's safe. There has been no research on the safety of 5G, and there's people in high positions that have questioned why the rush to 5G without actual health safety trials. And so I do think that there's probably a negative effect on the human physiology when it's released. But to see such a prolific and diverse spread of this across many nations, as well as on cruise ships and a lot of things, you just have to tie too many things together for that theory to work well. It's juggling a lot of things that have to be pretty perfect. So to me, this just seems like a real virus. I did want to just talk about my thoughts on 5G again. I'm not saying that 5G is harmless. I definitely do think it's something we need to watch out for. But whether 5G is the culprit of this specific, if you want to call it pandemic, I'm not there yet. And I don't think I can be. And I think as time starts to pan out here, and I don't think we're going to have to wait a lot of time, right? If we look at South Korea, their cases are just exploding over a weekend. In Italy and other areas as well, Iran, the cases are just exploding. And so as we start to see this proliferate across the world, the whole 5G theory starts to crumble on itself, just like the theory that this was only targeted towards the Asian populace. So I wanted to get those out of the way. The second thing that I also forgot to talk about before we get into the faith-based topics is about what do you need to have? What do you need to prep for? We already talked a lot about the essentials, and I talked about some of the protective equipment, the PPE, personal protective equipment that you might need. I mentioned in those videos that if you prepare ahead of time and you get all your essentials, the toughest thing that you're going to have to deal with is just when do you make the decision to self-quarantine? You don't want to do it too early because that can be really negative. If you can't be pulling out your kids out of school and then nothing happens for a month. You don't want to go too early. You also don't want to go too late. So it's about trying to find that good balance and not being in the populace while it's spreading. So that's going to be the most difficult thing about it. And so in my prior videos, I was really recommending people, don't be going out crazy buying biohazard suits and everything like that. But I did think about that last aspect just a little bit more. Me and some of my friends were talking on Facebook, and we were talking about some of the prepared measures that we're taking in case this has an outbreak in our area. And I do think you may want to have, just in case, and you don't have to spend a whole ton of money on this, but that you have some type of PPE in terms of an outfit in addition to a mask. And the reason why I think that is, one, you're really not going to need it if you prepare beforehand. You should just be in your home and avoid public places, things like that, and it's no problem at all. However, the thing that I started thinking about was if you start to have family members within your home or outside of your home that actually contract the disease, and you need to go and take care of them or bring them to a hospital, well, then that's a pretty legitimate case that you can't really prep for, right? We're prepping that we don't have to go out at all, but in case one of your family members needs help, and this also plays into the whole faith thing. Me personally, I'm like, yeah, I'm never going out into this thing if there's an active outbreak in my area. But the one situation I can find myself actually putting myself in harm's way and having the need to maybe gown up is if there's family or friends that need help. And there you go. That's why I would need that type of PPE. So I talked a little bit about PPE in my last video, but I just wanted to show you some of the images about, what I have. It's nothing extreme. It's very practical. It can be used for other purposes, and so it's not something that goes to waste. But I mentioned, in terms of a full body covering, you want to make sure that anything that you're gowning up with is non-porous. So that way it's more easily disinfected. So if you already have a pair of rain boots, great. Start with that for footwear. In terms of your pants and a jacket, this is what I would suggest. Let me go ahead and switch over to my screen here. I mentioned this in my last video. You can find these on Amazon. No one's panic buying these at all. You can actually find rain suits at Lowe's as well. I found these right next to the mask. There's complete rain suits for, I think it was $13. These on Amazon were anywhere from $17 to $20. So I mean, fairly cheap. I mean, these things aren't anywhere near expensive. If you try to find the equivalent for biological preparedness, they're called Tyvek, the white Tyvek suits that you see a lot of the hospital care workers. Those are all jacked up in price beyond belief. Would not recommend you go and do anything like that. For one, because they're meant to be disposable, and so you're just not going to be able to get many of those at a good price. This one that's water resistant, or the rain jackets, the reason why I suggest that is because you can potentially disinfect those with bleach and maybe reuse them. So again, rain boots also have duct tape for where the seam of your pant and the rain boot connects. And then frog togs or a rain jacket. Again, something that you could use just for regular everyday outings. But again, in case of an emergency, you need to take care of a friend or family. This is something you could gown up with. As far as hands, okay, right, you would wear gloves, nitrile gloves, or even if you had like dish gloves, anything like that. And then you can see it comes with a hood as well, which is great, and it has a drawstring. So I have this model, and I have a full face mask now, right? You don't call me On Point Preparedness for nothing, right? So I've got I've got my own sort of thing here just for absolute emergencies. But I tested it out, and this hood does cover over the entire face mask. So for me, that is, I really don't expect to ever have to do that. But again, it's for emergencies. And even with this, you need to know about how to proceduralize the degowning process. I talked about that in my last video. I'll just show you, one or two things here. So just really quickly, you have to have some forethought in terms of after you go out into an area, how are you going to get back into your home and not contaminate your home? If you live in an apartment, you're going to want to do this outside of your apartment complex or in your hallway. If you live in a suburb, you want to do this in your yard. But because these rain jackets or these frog togs are water resistant, one of the things that I would have prepared beforehand, before I'd even approach going into the house, is that I would stand in some type of tub. You could use a small baby pool. You could use some of those doormats that are used for wet boots that can basically encase water. But you can get either one of these camping showers, gravimetric camping showers, or you could have some of those pressurized spray bottles. You may have seen some of those for around the house where you spray insecticide or things like that. You just get one of those pressurized bottles, and then when you get home, you could literally spray yourself down with a mixture of bleach at the concentration on the bottle where it says for hospital disinfection, and spray yourself head to toe and wait for the duration of 10 minutes, which it says on the bottle. If it evaporates before then, give yourself a second spray. And, you've essentially disinfected to a degree the outer parts of your garment. And then you can proceed by you're going to have to think this out, which portion of clothes to take off first. But you would more than likely, take off your gloves and then start degowning and make sure that you're only touching the inside of your clothes and never touch the outside. Also, I recommended you have 70% isopropyl alcohol. It's what's used in a lot of pharmaceutical manufacturing companies as well as OTC manufacturing companies. Don't get 91%. They sell 91%. And don't think that a higher percent is better. It's not. It's actually worse. You want to make sure you get 70% IPA, 70% isopropyl alcohol. And make sure that with every step you're doing, you take off your gloves, spray your hands with isopropyl alcohol. You zip off your coat and start taking that off. Spray your hands with isopropyl alcohol. And then take off, the outer frog tog pants or rain jacket pants. Spray your hands with alcohol. Always make sure you're just, spraying your hands down. And then, obviously when you get inside, take a shower. That's probably, that's a very robust degowning procedure. I don't even think really some of the hospitals are going to that extreme. I think that they are having a degowning procedure where they're not touching the outside of their garments and they're disposing them in an appropriate way. And they're also probably showering afterwards. But to go to, this level of actually going through a decontamination shower, I don't know if they're necessarily doing that. So this is a fairly good DIY and cheap approach. I mean, if you look at everything, right, most people have rain boots. These frog togs, I get them on Amazon for $17, not a whole lot. A camping shower or a pressurized bottle. You may even have one of those pressurized bottles. Or even just, it doesn't even have to be pressurized. It's better if it's pressurized because it creates a fine mist. But even if you have spray bottles, these are all things that you have laying around your house. And so you can be very practical about this and not, start racking up a whole bunch of money for things that you'll never use. These are things that you are more than likely going to use even if you don't use them in this situation. And again, this is just for emergencies. But I did want to mention that because that is one situation where I could find myself gowning up. I mean, gowning up does sound fairly extreme, but again, while you may be prepared for what's coming or what may come, some of your family members may not, and you don't want to leave them stranded. Which is a great segue into talking about faith. So I had shared some of these verses on my Facebook page. And it's really true. So in Matthew 24, it just says, and because lawlessness, or in the KJV, iniquity, increases, the love of many will grow cold. And this is absolutely true. This is so true because just the iniquity of the world, and I would say even transgression and iniquity that you experience within the body of Christ, with the arguing and then the turmoil that's happening within the body, you sort of just want to be closed off and you sort of just want to withdraw from people. And this is really what it's talking about. It says because there's just so much lawlessness, because there's so much iniquity, because there's so much of a lack of hope and just seeing the human species go down the toilet in terms of morality, there is a tendency to have your heart harden towards that. There's actually a reference to this to one of the churches in Revelation 2, the church of Ephesus, which Jesus Christ rebukes. And he says, you're patiently enduring, You're seeing these people that are evil and you cannot bear with them. You hate the evil. So I think a lot of us are on the same page, right? We see all this evil. We see lies of the government. We see the terrible things that this virus is basically putting on humanity. And we don't like that. We hate it. We pray against it. But we can harden ourselves and turn cold to it as well. I'll tell you how that is in a second here. But Jesus says, "But this I have against you. You've abandoned the love that you had at first. Remember, therefore, from where you have fallen, repent and do the works you did at first. If not, I will come to you and remove your lampstand from its place, unless you repent." I'm going to reference this article here. I'll put it in the YouTube description box after the live stream. Really good article about the fruit of the Spirit during times of crisis. It's more or less speaking to what I'm going to mention right now. But, me and Tony from A Minute to Midnight, we had a show on his channel several weeks ago. I don't know if many of you had seen it, but we talked about prepping and we talked about faith. And one of the things that we brought up, which I don't think a lot of people are bringing up, is if you want to be prudent, if you have a prudent mind, you see these things are coming, you see that the Bible encourages preparedness. A lot of examples of preparedness in the Bible in terms of Noah preparing the ark, in terms of, I think it's Joseph storing grain. There's a lot of places where someone is prudent and they sort of hear the calling of God to prepare for a time of tribulation ahead, and they do so. You can get prepared for that. You can be prepared in faith, and you can be all well and good. But here's the difficult part, and this is what I really want you to pray on. You've prepared, and you have limited supplies, because we all have limited funds. I mean, let's just face it. Some of us may not have any additional funds, and we can't prepare. I've seen a lot of people in the comments saying, I just don't have money to do anything, and so my faith is really just it. That's what I have, is my faith. Whereas other people, they do have faith as well, but they have the means to prepare. Well, here's the thing. What if a brother or sister, or even someone of the world, comes to you who has much and asks for something, whether it be a mask, whether it be food, whether it be water? What are you going to do? That is a question that I think you all really need to pray about and think about. Because again, if we enter into a time of hardship, a time of tribulation, if you were in the city of Wuhan and there were people that were not as well prepared as you, and perhaps they are a brother or sister and they come to you in need because they are one of these people on the YouTube channel that are commenting saying they didn't have the funds to do this, or maybe they did have the funds and they just didn't see it coming and it caught them by surprise. Are you going to retract away from that? Are you not going to give, saying that you should have done better? You should have seen the signs. I can't help you. To me, that's something you really got to think about. Is that your love being wax cold? I would say it is. Now, it's not to say we give everything away, but a good example that Tony brought up was when Jesus was ministering to, I think, the 5,000 or the 7,000. There's many times where they were out in somewhat of the wilderness. They were out far away from town. There was no inns. There was no place to get food. And there was a boy who had a handful of fish and some bread. It was all he had. And Jesus said, "Give that to me." I mean, just imagine the faith of this boy. He could say, "This is all I got." And food is like a day or two travels away. No, I'm not giving this to you. But he did in faith. He gave it and Jesus multiplied. And so it's sort of the same situation as you think about, these times that we're going into. We're not going to have plenty. It's going to be pretty restrictive. And what are you going to do when a brother or sister comes to you in need? Are you going to hold off, or are you going to give out of the abundance of love in your heart? Very, very critical thing to think about in all of this. And I had mentioned this when we were talking about faith and prepping before. There's a lot of people, whether because they're limited by their funds or just their conscience bears witness that they would they just don't want to prepare. They actually feel it's a sin. And again, that is between you and God. That is your faith. If that's what your faith says, I'm not going to get in the way of that. My faith tells me to prepare. The thing that I have to keep in balance is that I don't prepare in fear. Whatever faith you have to be aware of the potential trials of that faith. If you have the means to prepare and you don't, and bad things happen to you, is your faith going to be intact? Are you going to rebel against God, or are you just going to say, okay, this is the challenge that God has set before me? If I have the means to prepare, and my faith is to prepare, and I do prepare a multitude of things, what if all those things go up in flames? I had mentioned this before. What if my house goes up in flames and I lose everything? Am I still going to have faith? That could be a trial of my faith. But you don't know if one person's faith to do this marries up with another person's faith to do another thing. To the person, God might be using, saying, trust in me. I've got your back. The faith that you have, I'm telling you, just to be still, and I will take care of your needs. That's to one person. To another person, he's going to say, you have a means to prepare. Your faith says, I want you to store up things. How do we not know that God brings these two people together and faith is made complete? We don't. And the Bible really does talk about your conscience and your faith being something very individual in terms of some of these topics. Again, there's some things that the Bible is very clear on. Other things, it's more based on conscience. And so, that's really just what I wanted you all to think about with regards to matters of faith. Is we're going to enter into some very hard times, and we have to be careful that our love does not wax cold, because Jesus rebuked an entire church because their love waxed cold. And he said, repent of that and basically come back to the love that you embodied when you were first walking and abiding with me. And so that's something we always want to keep in mind. But that's all I had for you guys tonight. Let me just go ahead and just check out the comments here real quick. Just see if there's any particular questions that people have before I turn off the live stream here. Let's see here. So some people asking about medications, about fish antibiotics. One of the things about antibiotics, if you don't really know a lot about it, I probably wouldn't go down the route of veterinary or fish antibiotics. They can be of the same. They can be the same. They can be the same antibiotics. I am not entirely sure if the quality control behind them is the same as human doses. In fact, I would argue that it's more than likely not the same. But again, in a life-threatening situation where you need it, doesn't really matter so much. That's sort of the argument. But with antibiotics, I think you just have to be careful. For some of you that have been tuned into my channel for quite a while, you'll know that my daughter had sepsis last December. And so she was actually allergic to 2 of the different antibiotics that they gave her. And that it actually caused paralysis temporarily. One of the antibiotics did. And so I think current culture today is that antibiotics are sort of like pill popper things. They're sort of like vitamins. It's just something that you sort of automatically get when you go to the doctor's office. But antibiotics can definitely have severe side effects if you don't know what you're doing. So if you research it sufficiently, I do know a lot of preppers that go and they get fish antibiotics, and that's something that you don't need with a prescription. But odds are, honestly, with how overprescribed antibiotics are, if you go to the doctors and you say you're sick and you have some respiratory illness and you've been sick for a while, they're probably going to give you an antibiotic anyways, just to be honest. So I don't know if you really need to be sourcing out fish supplies or anything like that, but that's just my thoughts on it. Let's see what any other questions are here. Just scrolling on through. Let's see. I'm just going to go to the bottom of the comments here. Does anyone have any questions before we go ahead and turn off the live stream? Well, let me just mention one more thing about medicines, because I've mentioned this in some of the other live streams that I did. Prepper medicines, some of the core ones that I was speaking about was antibiotics, anti-diarrheal, and anti-vomiting medications are sort of the three cores, in addition to any specific medicines that you have for a health condition. And that this virus, for these types of viruses like flu or things that cause pneumonia, there's not a lot of prescription medications that you can stock up on and prep where you're going to be able to beat this thing. However, a lot of people have comments about herbals. So the comment that I saw was colloidal silver and other things of that nature. By all means, I don't know if it's going to work or not. Some people swear by it, but I can't really say if it's going to work or not. I mean, this is no joke. It's a serious virus. From the CT scans and X-rays that I've seen, it's about 1 week to 1.5 weeks for traces of pneumonia to be seen in the lungs to being bilateral across both lungs. Again, like most of the cases are at the onset of symptoms, if you get symptoms, right? Because these symptoms, some people are asymptomatic for 14, 21, now they're saying 27 days, which I think is just crazy. But on the onset of symptoms, people's chest x-rays are that within the first 0 to 2 days, you're starting to see some spotting, some fluid-filled pockets of pneumonia. And then by about a week, 80% of patients have bilateral, both lungs, pneumonia. So it's very quick. And, they're throwing all sorts of hardcore antivirals, steroids, and all sorts of things at some of these patients, and they're still not getting better. So the holistic approach, I don't know. It might work, might not. It's of no hurt to store these things and prepare. I mean, by all means, you might as well have them. So, yeah, I do have elderberries. I have dried elderberries. I purchased those, and I think I mentioned it on herbalcom.com. That's a site that you can get things like, echinacea. That's another thing for like cold and flu. So if you want to stock up on echinacea, elderberry, colloidal silver, interesting thing that I want to mention as well, and I'm very curious to see if this is efficacious. But when my daughter was going through sepsis, I knew of other hospitals in the United States that have successfully treated sepsis by high doses of intravenous vitamin C. And I asked the hospital that we were at if we could do that, and they said, we've never heard of any such thing. It's not going to have any effect. So we never got to do it. Instead, we put these antibiotics in her that cause partial paralysis temporarily, thank goodness. Partial paralysis, and the other one she had an allergic reaction to and completely swelled up. So excuse me, but I think I'd rather choose vitamin C, especially when these doctors are claiming that it's having like amazing success rates. And so I've seen some doctors that are really on board this train of intravenous vitamin C say that this actually might be something that could help. If it helps in cases of sepsis, again, those cases were more bacterial sepsis. I don't know if it helped in cases of viral sepsis, but that's one of the things that I think would be really interesting. If you ever, seriously about this, if you come down or someone that comes down with sepsis, or if this COVID-19 thing were to come into your area and someone were to get sick, that is something that I would really press the doctors on hard, is to research. And I'll put the article. I'll put it's a legit article. It's not just a news article. It's an official PubMed medical article about this intravenous vitamin C cocktail. And it is a cocktail. It's not just vitamin C. There's actually some other drugs in there as well, because the high doses of vitamin C, I believe, can create crystallization within your kidneys. And so there's another drug in there to combat that. So it's like a cocktail, like 3 things, but incredibly safe. That's something that you should just keep in the back of your mind. So I promise I will put that link in the YouTube description box. But that is something that I think is incredibly promising because of its high success rate in cases of sepsis. I mean, it can't hurt, right? Can't hurt. So by all means, stock up on the herbals. But this is just such a serious thing that I don't know if it's going to be super efficacious. Let's see, maybe one more question, and then we'll go ahead and close out for the night. And then hopefully I'll be able to start working on some of those ministry videos for you all and get those out to you soon. I'm going to talk about fasting. Biblical fasting is going to be one of the topics. And then I've got some small little types and shadows for you as well. I think we're going to talk about the Nazirite vow, talk about what that means. There's a lot of people on YouTube saying, we found the path of the Nazarene. You'll find Hebrew rooters saying, we are the Nazarene. And you find some other offshoots of people saying, we are the Nazarene. So we're going to look into actually what the type and shadow of the Nazarene really is. It's a really interesting type and shadow type of study. I just need to start compiling those notes for you. So those are some of the things to look out for over the next week. All right, let's see here. Any other questions? I think I found one here. There's a lot of questions about whether this is a biological weapon or not. Oh, there's actually a lot of questions. A lot of people ask that question. So, does it matter? That's the way I approach the question. Does it matter? Does it matter whether it came from a rat, or does it matter that it came from a biological weapon facility? The fact of the matter is it's spreading rapidly across the globe, and we need to prepare whether it came from a rat or whether it came from a biological weapon facility. I think I mentioned it earlier, was that, I don't trust governments at all. And we sort of know some of the atrocities that governments have done to their people. And so it's not out of the realm of possibility that this is indeed a biological weapon that had somehow either leaked out of that Wuhan BSL-4 laboratory, or that it was purposefully introduced. There's actually a lot of information to suggest that it did come from that laboratory. There are some interviews that I've seen of people that have a specialty in biological warfare, and their comment with their expertise is that this did originate out of that BSL-4 lab, and this is a biological strain, a biological warfare strain. There's also some interesting information that I've read to state that the BSL-4 lab in Wuhan has actually had other incidents of coronavirus SARS escape from the lab, and they were able to quarantine that. So there is prior instances of the virus leaking out from that laboratory before. There's also some very peculiar things where the Ministry of Defense, or the Chinese Communist government, put out some notices about strengthening security around biological safety labs. And so they're like, that's sort of odd that you would say we need to strengthen our BSL-4 securities. Is that because a leak happened? I don't know. As well as, I think one of the top Chinese officials for biological warfare was put in charge of that BSL-4 lab just recently over the next 2 weeks. So a lot of suspicious things to think that this really did originate out of that laboratory. Whether it was accidental or purposeful, well, that's a whole nother topic. The only thing that I call attention to, which is really interesting, is the timing upon which this virus happened. So it was leaking out apparently sometime around December. One of the things I mentioned in prior videos was that it could not have been at a more opportune time in terms of a virus proliferating across the globe, because this happened right at the peak travel time of the Chinese Lunar New Year. Interesting timing. For an accidental release out of this BSL-4 laboratory, it sure did pick, an amazing opportune time to escape that lab. And we also have the things like Event 201 from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and all those preparedness events that they were doing back in October 2019. Very suspicious. I think it's very funny that that they actually had to respond to people and say, in no way was this predicting the novel coronavirus that came out. That just shows that there was a heavy, amount of communication towards them to say, explain yourself. So lots of just, really suspicious things. I do see a couple of folks talking about the 5G thing. If you just earlier on in this, I talked about why I don't think it's 5G, because again, there's a critical mass of doctors and scientists who have person-on-person contact with a lot of these coronavirus cases. And we're seeing lots of CT scans. We're seeing lots of x-rays. There is definitively a rapid progressing pneumonia in these people's lungs, bilateral pneumonia that's developing. And so one of the arguments, there was, one of the ladies, Ashley, I forget her name. She has a YouTube channel. She's a Christian lady. One of her points that she made was, one of the symptoms is dry cough, but pneumonia should be a wet cough. As one of the evidence that this is 5G. Just to that, it starts out as a dry cough. As I looked at some of the autopsy data and some of the things, again, within the first 0 to 2 days, there's only very patchy, if at all, any fluid-filled patches of pneumonia in the lungs. But then as you get towards a week or a week and a half, that's where you start to get the bilateral pneumonia in both lungs. And they are testing the sputum or the phlegm for these reverse transcriptase real-time polymerase chain reaction assays, the PCR tests. So they are assaying phlegm and the DNA and RNA that comes from that to positively identify the coronavirus. So the dry cough versus the pneumonia thing, I don't think that's a good rationale for why it is a 5G only type of issue. The other thing that I just wanted to mention is just, because you have a critical mass of doctors and scientists that are having experience with this virus, when we start to see it proliferate across third world nations and things like that, that 5G theories may start to crumble out. And I also mentioned that, there's the test method for actually identifying this virus has been publicly released. So we have the unique RNA probes that have been released by the CDC. Now, I don't trust the CDC, but I don't think the entire CDC is corrupt. I think there's good scientists there that are releasing good information. They have released a unique probe for the polymerase chain reaction test, and they've released the entire test method so that other labs can diagnose this test. And so you just don't release those types of things for a fake virus. And you don't really release those things if it's an entirely different thing that's happening. Again, the argument of that video was that the 5G basically influencing oxygen atoms is causing people to suffocate because of lack of oxygen. And on the side, 5G might be causing fluid-filled lungs and things like that. But the primary argument was that people just weren't getting oxygen because of what 5G was doing to the oxygen atoms themselves. And I don't know, there's just a lot of things that need to be perfect for that to come together for me as a theory. And I just don't see it right now. So again, I still think 5G probably causes ill health effects, but I just don't think that it's, something like that could cause such a proliferation of this health crisis across the world. There's just too many things that have to be balanced and be perfectly juggled. So that's my thoughts. Again, just an opinion. Everyone's entitled to think how they want. But hope you all take this seriously. More important than just the prepping and just the news and everything like that. Really take the faith thing seriously. It's honestly challenging for me to think about that, right? Just thinking about what I've prepped and what I have, and I've prepped for my family and I've prepped for friends. But if I start having other people, especially brothers and sisters in Christ, that start to want to ask things from me, my fleshly reaction, no lie, would be one of a little bit of animosity. Like I'd start to pull back a little bit. So we have to look at these scriptures and really start to be sober-minded about them. No, God's word prevails over my word, and I don't want to give into my flesh. I don't want to shrink back. I want my love to shrink back. And so, really just meditate on these scriptures and keep them in the back of your mind if you were to ever find yourself in these situations. So, give you a lot of things to think about, and hope you enjoyed this. I will not say this is my last coronavirus video because this situation is progressing so much. I think maybe what I'd like to do is have someone on for my next video. So maybe Tony, or maybe we can get someone like John Haller or something like that on, just so we can have like a nice group conversation and have it based on faith and everything of that. So until then, hope you all have a good evening. This is Mike with On Point Preparedness. God bless.